Who has joined us, and good evening from very rainy Colombo, Sri Lanka. Welcome to our independent food systems dialogue on participatory and inclusive climate risk management for resilient and climate-friendly food systems. Food systems around the globe are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, which are set to become more frequent and intense over the coming decades. Crop cultivation, livestock, fisheries, and aquaculture. Also, welcome to everyone who will join us on Facebook. Right, sorry. So crop cultivation, livestock, fisheries, and aquaculture, as well as related sectors such as forestry, are heavily affected by changes in weather patterns, extreme weather events, and slow onset processes such as sea level rise, soil degradation, and loss of ecosystem services. I hope this dialogue will generate a much needed discussion on participatory inclusive climate risk management that's needed for resilient and climate friendly food systems. And I wish this dialogue all the very best. And from here on, I hand it over to the curator of our session, Executive Director Vasita Vijayanayaka. Vasita, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Sanasha. I hope everyone can hear me. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you for joining this independent dialogue on Action Track 5. And today we have a great lineup of speakers, and we're very glad to have all of you here who would also contribute to finding solutions to address food security, or rather food insecurity, as well as hazards and risks, and how we could have innovative solutions to things that we're focusing on under Action Track 5. To start the discussion today, we have the co-chair of Action Track 5 of UN Food System Summit, Professor Salimul Haq, who is the Director of International Center for Climate Change and Development, with us, who would deliver one of the keynote speeches. So I would like to request Professor Salimul Haq to speak to you now.
Thank you very much, Vasita, and thank you to for organizing this event and for inviting me to give a few updates and opportunities here for you. So, as you heard, my name is Salimul Haq. I'm the director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development at the Independent University Bangladesh, based in Dhaka, where I'm speaking from. But I also happen to be the co-chair of Action Track 5, which is on resilience, which is one of 5 action tracks of the UN framework of UN Food System Summit that is going to take place in September alongside the UN General Assembly meeting in New York. Now, this is a different kind of summit in that it is not a summit that like the climate change or biodiversity or so many others where governments of different countries come together, negotiate text around an agreement, and the summit outcome is the signing or adoption of an agreement. In this case, the agreement is already assumed to have been done. And there are 2. Firstly, the Sustainable Development Goals. So there are 17 of those. They have all been agreed. They are agreed goals. One of them, Sustainable Development Goal number 2, very specifically on food. The second set of agreements are the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, both mitigation and adaptation. Now, these are all assumed to have been agreed. So now what the Food System Summit is going to do is to look at them as systems, not just food, but systems, which is connecting Sustainable Development Goal 2 on hunger to all the other Sustainable Development Goals and also to the 2 climate change goals. And the way the summit is organized is what is often termed the People's Summit. Is a bottom-up summit where they are soliciting advice, input, solutions, ideas for actions, for taking things forward, to implement what we have already agreed from a wide variety of stakeholders. And the process for doing this by the Secretary General of the UN is he first appointed a special envoy to carry out this task. She is Dr. Kalibata, Agnes Kalibata from Rwanda, former Minister of Rwanda. And Dr. Kalibata, in turn, invited 5 chairs, 5 individuals, non-governmental individuals, to host or chair these 5 tracks. And I was invited to do one. I have 2. My track, Action Track 5, has 2 co-chairs, myself and Sandrine Dixon de Cleve from the Club of Rome. The others have 1 chair each. And so there are 6 of us over 5 action tracks. And we have been carrying out for the last 6 months a lot of conversations and discussions with different stakeholders around the world to get ideas. And we've received more than 2,000 ideas in 2 waves. We had 1 wave and then a second wave. And that's over. The waves are complete. They finished on 31st of May. Now, what we have done with them is we have put them under a series of buckets or umbrellas. So each of the action tracks has a group of 3, what we are calling action areas. And then under each of these action areas, there are clusters of the different solutions that we received that we bundled into particular clusters. And so in my action area on resilience, we have 3 action areas. The first action area is on making food systems more resilient. And this includes making them resilient to pandemics like COVID, making them resilient to climate change, making them resilient to economic shocks. So making food systems more resilient. And the premise being that food systems are definitely not resilient, as we have just seen with the COVID-19 pandemic causing food shortages in quite a few places around the world, both locally within countries as well as globally as well. The second action area that we have under Action Track 5 on resilience is food as a human right. So what we are promoting is the idea of human rights, in which we already have a right to education and right to freedom. We have also right to food. And so food is not just a commodity anymore, but it is something that everybody has a right to receive in an adequate amount and in a adequate nutritional balance as well. So a right to food is the second big bucket under which we have a number of solution clusters as well. And then the third broad area that we have are climate resilient pathways for food systems going forward. And this is very much linking the food systems to the climate change issue. It is also linking the at the global level, linking the Food System Summit, which will happen in September, with the Conference of Parties of the Climate Convention, which will happen in November in Glasgow, and also at the national level, linking food into the national development plans, national adaptation plans, national mitigation plans, on linking up food systems with taking things forward at the national level. And an important feature of this new novel architecture of summitry is that in addition to these global issues that are being pulled together at the global level, there are also a series of national dialogues taking place in every country. Some started early, some started late, but all of them have now started and they are going forward. And they are not just one-off dialogues, there will be a series of dialogues. They are feeding in right now, they are feeding into the summit. There will be a pre-summit on the 26th, from the 26th to the 28th of July in Rome. That is when we, the chairs of the different action tracks, have to hand in the different solution clusters that we have been putting together. We'll hand it over to the UN, and then at that point, the UN and the member states of the UN will take over the process to the summit in September. And the outcome of the summit will be a series of actions. It's not just agreements on what needs to be done, but a series of actions that will be taken forward by coalitions of actors. These coalitions of actors will include member states, governments of number of countries. There may be a small number, there may be a big number. Some of the actions may be at the national level, some would be at the regional level in different regions. So we have one, for example, in the Sahel in Africa, one for the Pacific Islands in the Pacific, and so on. And then some of them will be global. The climate change one, for example, will be a global action. And so these actions, which will finally be endorsed at the summit. We don't know which ones will finally get through. That will be a issue of negotiation by the governments, because the UN is ultimately the governments of the UN that constitute the UN. They will then select the ones that will go forward. And then the outcome of the summit is not just a new declaration or a piece of paper, although the Secretary General will be making a statement, but it will be a series. We don't know the number. It may be half a dozen, it may be a dozen, it may be more than a dozen. We're not quite sure how many there will be, but a number of actions with coalition of actors around each of those actions that will be taken forward for the next 9 years that are left of this decade. So we have 9 more years left of the decade to 2030, and all of these actions will be what we will be taking forward, both at the national level in every country, but also collectively at regional and global levels as well. So let me conclude by saying one of the major features and innovations, if you like, of this process of summitry, we're calling it a people's summit as opposed to a traditional governments only summit, is that these coalitions of actors will include a variety of actors, both at the national level as well as at the global level, including not just central governments, but local governments as well, other parts of government, the private sector, both small private sector, SMEs, as well as big private sector, both national as well as international, farmers groups, fishers groups, herders groups, indigenous groups, youth groups, and so on and so forth. So the idea is to have it a whole of society approach to tackling food systems, to make them more robust and resilient going forward, from the local to the national to the global levels. And these independent dialogues like this one are a very, very important feed-in loop to us as the summit chairs of the action track chairs to take into the summit. But I would say even more important than getting input into the summit is aligning yourself for the outcomes of the summit, so that after the summit is over, you find a home for where you want to be part of, and you can take that action forward after the summit, because the results of the summit need to be actions to make food systems more resilient, and not just words on paper, as many other summits have been so far. So let me stop there, and once again, thank the organizers for organizing this meeting, and thank everybody for joining. My sincere apologies, I won't be able to stay very long as I have to rush off to another meeting as well. But Vosita, thank you very much for inviting me. I hope that was a useful overview to start with. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Huck. It's been a long time since
mute.
you've been working. Am I? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Vosita.
Okay, great. Okay, so thank you very much. It's been a long time you've been working on this topic in Asia, as well as supporting a lot of developing countries in accessing different tools and mechanisms to address climate resilience. Before you leave, maybe we can take 2 questions for you, because I think you would be the one to answer any questions on procedural aspects related to Action Track 5,
Sure,
as well as
sure.
UN Food Summit.
Sure, happy to do that.
Thank you very much. So if you have any questions, you could raise your hand, or else you can type your question in the chat box as well. Over to you who may have any questions for Professor Salimul Haq. While we wait, can I quickly ask you a question? So you mentioned about the waves of solutions. How would the ones that are being discussed now directly incorporate into the solutions that are being presented to the final food summit? The countries that will be attending this and actors. The vetting system would be from the technical experts, or is it like a participatory system where the vetting would happen? How does that work?
So the inputs into the system have already happened. They closed on the 31st of May. However, they have all been curated. We got over 2,000 inputs, and all of them have been, nothing has been thrown away, nothing has been kept out, but they have been bundled into what I described to you as different clusters under different action areas, linked with each other. Some of them are very similar. The similar ones have been put together. And these are all now available on the website. So I would strongly recommend that you take a look at the UNFSS website and look at the different solution clusters that have already been there. And I'm almost certain that anything that any of you are interested in or are working on, you will find it is already in there somewhere. And so then what you need to do is to communicate directly with the co-leads, because all of them are co-led from different action areas. As I said, these are no longer silos, these are cross-cutting. And let them know that you want to become part of that group, and you can then shape that particular solution cluster going forward. So now we are in the business of soliciting participation if you're interested in participating. Now, I would guess that more than 90% of you will find a place in the existing architecture that is on the website. And so you can join forces with that particular group and shape that group. If there's something that they're saying that you're not keen on or you want to change, then join and change it. You can influence it. If you have something which I would be very surprised to see that is brand new and nobody has said it already, then definitely let me know. Come to me. But you do have to do the homework of finding out what is already there, and you need to look at what is there. You can disagree with what is there, but then you have to join in disagree, not sitting from the outside and saying, this is bad, we don't like it. Because we are now open for joining, for you to join and to shape things. So if you say this is, this thing should be done in slightly different way, then join up and tell us how to shape it going forward. So we are now in the business of soliciting and accepting inputs and joining forces to shape the different solution clusters going forward. And I would just recommend that you have a look at them on the website and find a home for yourself to join forces with. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. And there's one more question. That's okay. Okay, how would these actions find themselves into existing development processes, especially in developing countries? So they're looking at convergences and synergies. If you could please elaborate a bit.
Sure. So there are, as I mentioned, there are two levels at which the outcomes of the summit will go forward. The global level, which is the one I am associated with, we will hand over to the UN Secretary General at the pre-summit in July in Rome. The UN Secretary General, together with the member states, will then take forward to the summit in September, and the summit in September with the member states will make the final decisions on what goes forward. And the outcome will be a set of actions with coalitions of actors around them that will go forward at a global level. Now, as I mentioned, these global actions may have regional aspects to them, they may have national aspects to them, they may have local aspects to them. So again, if you can find yourself relevant for any of these, you can join in with them going forward. In parallel to the global effort that I've just described, every country is going to have a national, they're already having national dialogues. These national dialogues will not end with the summit. They will continue beyond the summit, and they will continue to shape national level actions on making food systems more resilient at the national level, which includes also the local level. And they may also be involved in international ones as well. So there are two parallel ways in which one can engage with the process of the summit outcomes afterwards. Before, as I said, look at what is on the table already in the website, join forces with the people who are in those coalitions, putting them together, and you can shape them going forward. But after the summit, you can also join in the actions that have been identified with the coalitions of actors and join forces with them either at the national level or at the global level whichever you want, or both, if that is something that you are interested in doing. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Professor Haq, for finding time to join us today in the middle of all the work that you're doing. I know you have so many meetings, especially related to the Food Summit.
Indeed.
So thank you very much for coming today to speak to us.
Great. Thank you very much. Sorry I couldn't stay longer. And good luck with the dialogue.
Thank you.
Right.
So
Bye-bye.
now we'll move to our next speaker, who's also a keynote speaker, and he is the CEO of African Risk Capacity Limited, Mr. Leslie Ndwalubu. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your surname. He will be joining us to speak about risk transfer and the work that they're doing on building resilience. Leslie, the floor is yours. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and I hope you can hear me as well. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. And maybe in my introduction, I would like to start by sketching out what I believe the challenge to be. When you look at Africa in particular, we are seeing firsthand the dramatic impact of climate change, especially when it comes to increasing the frequency and severity of weather-related disasters. We are seeing an unprecedented number of droughts, floods, and tropical cyclones. And all these weather events have a very disruptive impact on agriculture and food systems at large. Agriculture is extremely important in Africa, as it is in other parts of the developing world. In Africa, agriculture makes up 1/3 of the GDP and employs directly and indirectly 2/3 of the workforce. So it is extremely important to be able to come up with climate change adaptation and mitigation mechanisms. The way we are approaching this in Africa is that at the African Union level, the African Union is the regional body for African countries. The African Union has set up in 2012 this mechanism called the African Risk Capacity. And the African Risk Capacity comprises of two complementary institutions. We have, on the one hand, a developmental agency, which is called ARC Agency. And the role of ARC Agency is in working with countries on understanding their risk profile, developing contingency plans, developing national strategies for coping with natural disasters. And the second institution of the ARC Group is ARC Limited, which is an insurance company that offers risk transfer solutions to the African countries. Then in order to have an effective risk transfer solution, the starting point has to be a comprehensive national risk management strategy, which involves a risk layering approach, where you have the first layer of risk, which is really the risks that are occurring very frequently but have low severity, such as recurrent droughts and recurrent flooding. Then the second layer of the risk layering approach is the insurance layer, where a country decides that for the events that are happening not as frequently, so with less frequency, but with a much higher severity, this risk can be transferred to the insurance markets. And this is where ARC Limited, the second institution of the ARC Group, comes in and provides a parametric insurance policy to the country. The advantage of using parametric insurance is that there is very quick payout, because the size of the payout is based on the modeled losses. So just to illustrate this with an example, when you have a drought, you can estimate what the economic loss of a drought is going to be based on the level of rainfall and looking at historical yields. then this mechanism allows very quick payouts to the government so that relief efforts can start almost right away. Because the longer you wait in this type of situations, I think the more dire the situation becomes. So you have the opportunity using insurance to prevent a disaster from becoming a crisis. And this is where we are seeing a lot of the value of ARC. And then just going back to the risk layering, so you have the first layer, which is really dealt with through the normal budgetary process or the setting up of a contingency fund. You have a second layer, which is dealt with through the insurance mechanism, which I have just described. And then you have a third layer, which is a catastrophe bond type of layer. The risk layering approach also shows that insurance doesn't exist in isolation. Insurance is really part of a much wider ecosystem of risk management and part of the wide range of tools that are available to governments in order to deal with the effect of natural disasters. So you could use insurance, you could use the budgetary process, you could use a contingency fund, you could use other instruments such as the catastrophic drawdown facility, the CAT-DDO from the World Bank. But all these need to exist as part of a national framework and strategy to deal with natural disasters. So focusing maybe just a little bit on the insurance part and linking it to resilience and value chains. When you are running an insurance program, you can offer a macro level insurance policy, which will typically be an insurance policy taken by the government on behalf of its citizens. So when there is a drought, the money is paid to the government, and the government then uses those funds to alleviate the impact of a drought. Alternatively, you could have micro or meso insurance, which targets small to medium scale farmers through aggregators, through farmers associations, through cooperatives, and so forth. But again, the principle is the same. In the event of a drought or a flood, then the insurance company will pay money to the small to medium scale farmers, thereby allowing them to relaunch their operations in the next season. It prevents them from slipping into poverty. It prevents them from using negative coping mechanisms such as taking their children out of school so that they can work to provide for the family. It prevents the sale of livestock and other productive assets, and also prevents people from becoming internally displaced within the country, because after a major calamity, people tend to migrate into other communities, which can also spark some infighting between the various communities. So we really see insurance as a critical part of fighting climate change, of strengthening the agricultural value chains, and providing an instrument for resilience to the local communities, and thereby really strengthening the food security within a country. And again, all of this is extremely important in the context of COVID-19, where we might be seeing a compounding of disasters at a time when countries have less fiscal space to deal with that, given the fact that countries have already spent a considerable amount of money in fighting COVID-19, but also they have less money from tax receipts as a result of the pandemic. So I will stop here, and of course I'm happy to listen to any comments and to respond to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ndolovu. I don't think a lot of people think about risk transfer when we're talking about food systems, but this is a discussion that we are embarking on and getting into an expanded engagement with a lot of developing countries, I think, over the last few years. So it's great to hear from you. I will open the floor for questions now. I think we have a few already in the chat box. I'll quickly try to scroll up and try to read them. Okay, so there's one from Varuni, that is, when deciding payouts based on the parametric insurance mechanism, what are the chances of miscalculating the levels of damages, as payouts are, sorry, this is getting a bit difficult. Payouts are triggered by a common weather incident where the affected geographical location is covered. I hope you can see the question as well in case, yes.
Yes, I can see the question, and thank you very much for that very important question, because it really highlights, I think, one of the major shortcomings of parametric insurance. So as it has been highlighted, parametric insurance is in fact based on a model and not based on actual losses. The advantage of parametric insurance is in the speed of payouts, because you're not going to every single farm or every single district to calculate what the actual loss is. It allows the insurer to be able to very quickly settle claims. At ARC, we typically pay claims within 10 business days, so it's money into people's pockets very quickly. However, because the losses are modeled, there could be a difference between the actual losses that have been suffered by an individual vis-a-vis the amount that has been paid out. And in fact, this is at two levels. The first one is perceived basis risk, whereby somebody expects to receive a lot more money than they've actually received. But in fact, the calculation has been done correctly. Sometimes the way insurance payouts are calculated can be very complicated because there is usually a deductible, which is a self-retention of the farmer or of the insured, in the sense that if there is a loss of, say, $100, the first $50 of the loss is not covered by insurance. So then somebody that's expecting to receive $100 from an insurance payout because they've suffered $100 of loss ends up receiving $50. But this is all correct and in accordance with the insurance policy itself. This perceived basis risk is best addressed through education, through awareness campaigns, so that people are really familiar with how the insurance payout will work. But I will be the first one to admit that we haven't reached 100% level of knowledge in this regard. The second one is maybe more of a concern, which is the actual basis risk, where something has happened with the model, and as a result, the model has generated an error in the payout. Most often, people are concerned when they receive an amount that's less than what they believe they should be receiving. And this really is part of the parametric insurance mechanism. The way we try to overcome that is by refining our models using the feedback loop of the data that we receive, so that we are recalibrating our models and we're increasing the accuracy. But it is an iterative process, and it's something that takes time and we don't always get right. So on the one hand, you have a mechanism that is a very fast payout, which is important to farmers, but then you, at the same time, the mechanism doesn't always reflect the actual level of loss.
Right, thank you very much. So there are a few questions, but I think you answered some of them when you answered the first one. So I'll go to Adisha's question. He's asking about, okay, now I've got many more that went on top of it. Sorry, going back to that, yes. What is the current claim ratio of ARC, and could the model operate without concessionary finance from donors?
So then the long-term loss ratio of ARC, so and let me specify, it's a gross loss ratio, right? So before the impact of reinsurance is around 62%. And this is data that we've accumulated over the last 7 years. So it is a respectable loss ratio, which allows ARC as an institution to be financially sustainable while providing very good value to the clients of ARC, both at the country level, but also at the individual farmer level. So then maybe also just to expand and talk about reinsurance. Reinsurance is a big part of the work that we do at ARC, because it's a way to leverage the international capital markets, provide additional diversification to the market, which in turn provides lower cost to the beneficiaries of the ARC mechanism. So we are playing on this arbitrage that we have with the global reinsurance markets. Because again, the way we think about it, our mandate is to expand the access and affordability of insurance. So we're able to leverage all the tools that we have at our disposal to ensure that as many people as possible are getting access to insurance.
Okay, so thank you very much. There are so many questions, but unfortunately we can't take all of them due to lack of time. But if you could answer a few in the chat box, that would be great as well. I hope you'll continue to join us. And I will quickly move to the other speakers. We have 2 speakers before we go into group work. Our next speaker is from Insurance Global Partnership, Mr. Daniel Stadtmuller. He's the team leader of Insurance Secretariat at the German Corporation for International Cooperation. So Daniel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rosita, for your introduction and for having me at this very interesting event. And it's great that I can sort of follow to Leslie and give a bit more sort of a global perspective on the work of disaster risk finance and insurance, and then specifically diving into our work on gender. So as Leslie already highlighted, climate change, natural catastrophes, and also the COVID-19 pandemic particularly affect the most poor and vulnerable. So disasters have a greater impact on people that are most reliant on natural resource-based activities for their livelihoods, such as smallholder farmers. And I think that's especially important in the context of the food summit. These farmers relying on their annual crops to feed their families and to sustain their livelihoods. So after disaster, we know that the poor and the more vulnerable people are by definition less able to recover, and that this effect varies across communities, geographies, but it also varies across genders. We can also see right now, and Leslie also alluded to that, the climate risk compounding with the effects of the pandemic. That leads to aggravated fiscal pressures in developing countries, but it's also leading in some cases to tightened development budgets. And it shows us in a dramatic way how important it is to really build resilience at all levels, and in that process to really leave no one behind. So this is, I think, also the starting point for the Insure-Resilience Global Partnership, which was found by G20 and V20 countries in 2017 under the German presidency, G20 presidency. And the multi-stakeholder partnership acts as a central global platform for the scale-up of disaster risk finance and insurance solutions, ultimately really promoting financial protection against climate and disaster impacts. And many of the solutions under our partnership, which now has more than 100 members, are aimed at promoting food security in the face of climate change. So in 2019, the partnership's highest steering body endorsed the Vision 2025, which aims at covering 500 million poor and vulnerable people with prearranged risk financing and insurance solutions by 2025. And in 2020, the programs under the partnership, and this is also includes the African risk capacity, had already reached 140 million people in more than 100 countries, and really boosting their resilience through pre-arranged risk financing solutions that enable a timely and earlier disaster response, and can be of particular value for the resilience of food systems as well. And one of the topics that the Vision 25 identifies as sort of a cross-cutting objective is gender. There is, I would say, well-documented evidence of the differential impacts of climate change and natural disasters on men and women. And this is more pronounced in developing countries. So, for example, women commonly face higher risks and greater burdens from climate change in situations of poverty, because they tend to possess fewer assets and they depend more on natural resources for their livelihoods. And likewise, women's unequal participation in many cases in decision-making processes in labor markets compound these inequalities and often will prevent women from then really also contributing to climate-related planning, to policy making, and to implementation of climate and disaster risk finance and insurance as our focus solution space. And so having that in mind, and this is not only about the specific vulnerabilities of women, but in general, the fact that disasters have different impacts on men and women. And having that in mind, the high-level consultative group of the Inter-Resilience Global Partnership, so the high strategic governing body, endorsed a declaration on gender, and with that also mandated the Inter-Resilience Global Partnership and the Secretariat with the establishment of a Center of Excellence on Gender Smart Solutions. So what this center aims at doing is supporting the design, the promotion, and the integration of gender responsive and sensitive approaches to disaster risk finance and insurance solutions, which ultimately also feed into wider disaster risk management strategies. And so the center is a repository of information, and it also serves as a knowledge exchange platform, really trying to unlock the potential for gender transformation within the sector of disaster risk finance and insurance. So there are 4 pillars under the Center of Excellence that I would like to quickly highlight here. So the first one is what we call knowledge and evidence. This is a section that aggregates research, case studies to strengthen the evidence base of good practices and effective strategies on gender responsive climate and disaster risk finance. The second pillar is what we call guidance. So this is really aimed at implementation. It's about toolkits, guidance notes, as we call them, to really support policymakers, to support practitioners on the ground with implementing gender smart disaster risk finance and insurance solutions. So this really looks at the whole value chain of risk financing and insurance, and goes into each of the phases. And there are already some examples of these guidance notes, for example, on gender lens investing and also on gender informed monitoring and evaluation of disaster risk finance and insurance. The third pillar promotes information on relevant training opportunities and resources, which really aim to advance gender equality within the sector of CDRFI. So that includes leadership training, funding, and scholarship opportunities specifically focused on women. And currently, the Secretariat, the Inter-Resilience Secretariat, is also sponsoring a leadership and diversity program that really is intended to support insurance supervisors and regulators in developing policies that close the gender gap, and also in developing women's leadership capacity in regulatory organizations. And lastly, the last pillar is what we call community, and it's about creating a platform for collaboration. This will also over time include a directory of different gender and disaster risk finance experts to really enhance the development of gender-specific approaches within climate and disaster risk finance and insurance. And this will also include a series of online events, some of which we have already organized and have already taken place. So maybe to wrap up, I think the Insure Resilience Global Partnership has recognized that there's a huge need to address gender-specific vulnerabilities, but also to drive the financial inclusion of women and to promote co-benefits on gender dimensions within broader climate adaptation and also within resilience frameworks. And this is why we have established the center. Well, we would like to invite all of you to reach out to us in the Secretariat if you would like to learn more about the activities of the center, or if you would like to collaborate with us more closely. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. There were some questions earlier on gender, so I think your presentation answered those. We'll quickly take Ruani's presentation now on youth, and then we'll take questions for both of you together. So our next speaker is Ruani De Silva. She's the coordinator for Global Youth Forum on Climate Change. She will give an overview of how youth are taking action on food security now. So Ruani, can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
Yes.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool, perfect. So hello everyone, I am Ruani De Silva and I'm currently handling the coordination activities related to Global Youth Forum on Climate Change. So just to have a quick introduction on the Global Youth Forum itself, it was first organized in 2016 by SAC and Trust together with the Climate Change Secretariat of the Ministry of Environment as a part of something called the Sri Lanka Next program. And overall speaking, the main focus of the event is to encourage youth participation in sharing knowledge on key climate change issues and to provide youth a platform where they can share their ideas and also handle research and support youth to develop and improve on project proposals through capacity building and networking. So the last forum was held in 2020 December, and it was a virtual forum for the first time, and we had over 70 participants from over 70 countries participating with us, during which we had 4 main areas of focus of how we could look at, climate change and food systems and food security through a youth perspective. And so during the last forum, there were proposals submitted by youth who attended the event, out of which 2 were selected based on a public voting system. And during the event, the youth participants formed a collective to improve on these project proposals that address food security and building resilience in food systems. So that happened in December, and now we are at the phase where the project proposals were further elaborated with the engagement of the participants as well as other youth. And the next step of this, the proposals would be that we would be editing it and opening it up for comments from the public, so that youth or any other organizations who are interested in partnering with our forum activities and these proposals could do so. So after which we plan, how the proceeds would go was that we plan to look at supporting the implementation of these activities that were proposed through mentorships, partnerships with countries, and basically outreach programs and communication activities. So anywhere that there's youth or these project proposals may need help, we aim to support and implement them. So just bringing it back to the Food Summit and what we are speaking about today and the main discussion points today. If you were to look at Action Track 5, looking at the overall food security through a holistic solution and involving youth and their perspective on it was something that we discussed and something that we looked at in the Global Youth Forum. And it's just not only Action Track 5, we had other action tracks that we looked at as well, as such as 2 and 4. So just to wrap it up and just so that we can proceed with everything else, if there's anyone interested, this is basically an open invitation to mentor or connect with us in terms of the Global Youth Forum or the Food Summit work we do. Please do reach out to us. So that is basically what I should speak on.
Thank you, Rohini. So we have a few questions. So if anyone has questions for Rohini and Daniel, please type it into the chat box and I will read it out. So Daniel, we have a question for you. I'll start with you. It's from Varuni. And it says, would you be able to share good examples of gender-responsive financing approaches where gender-specific vulnerabilities have been addressed successfully in the developing country context? So Daniel, over to you if you could answer this question.
Thank you for this question, and indeed that's exactly what we're trying to do. I think there's some good work that has initiated in this regard. So there's work, for example, in the Philippines where practitioners have actually identified that there is men, for example, tend to be more exposed to asset losses from climate change, whereas women will be most exposed to economic losses from climate change. And based on that realization, then have targeted microinsurance products and tailored those to those specific needs. I think on the macro level, that's where we sort of need to look a bit more ahead into what can be done. For example, when disaster risk finance insurance and insurance solutions are linked to delivery systems or to money out mechanisms. So in other words, what is the contingency plan that the disaster risk finance and insurance payout is linked to? How does the funds that become available quickly after a disaster, how are these channeled to vulnerable populations? I think this is where we need to still do a lot of work, a lot of research to really understand how we can then address, as you say, the gender specific vulnerabilities and to make those decisions when a disaster has struck, to have, let's say, rules-based approaches and gender-sensitive approaches in linking disaster risk finance payouts to delivery systems such as contingency plans, such as social protection mechanisms, etc. But there are some examples more on the micro level, and I'm happy to share those in more detail after this event. Thank you.
Daniel, we are a bit behind our time schedule. So, Rohini, I'll park any questions for you. Okay, there's one coming in. Could you provide examples when engaging with youth? I'm assuming this is about examples for engagement of youth. Rohini, would you like to quickly answer this? How we can engage youth in actions related to food security? And I'm really sorry if you can't hear me clearly. It's raining really bad here, so the background noise is the rain that's coming on our house. So yes, Rohini, are you there?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, Natasha has continued her question, saying on how we could make them better stakeholders in the process. So what we we have a huge youth involvement at slight contrast, and what we believe is we have to involve them in every process in terms of policy making, in terms of actions, and in terms of community-based actions that we do. So we look into bringing them in as stakeholders at each level and taking their input and opinions and solutions at each level, and just not at other stake, and also giving them an opportunity at these discussions is a better way of involving them. And at Cycling Trust, we have a lot of youth events that we run, so that there is participation from all around the country, and it's just not youth from one segment of the country. So Natasha, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Rooney. Maybe we
Yes.
can elaborate a bit further during your group work, because we have 2 sessions of group work, breakout groups, and we're trying to hopefully keep the time today. So thank you, everyone. And I will request you to keep typing your questions, and hopefully the speakers can answer them in the chat box. Now, I think I'll pass the mic to Sanashia, who has a quiz for everyone. Sanashia, are we ready with the quiz?
Yes, we are ready with the quiz. If you all have been a part of our previous discussions, you know that we have a good Mentimeter. So we are back at it with another quiz. I'm just going to drop it on the chat. So please log on to www.menti.com and use the code. Let me just quickly share my screen. Use the code 732822657. So we're going to first start off with maybe just like an open-ended question. We're going to keep this up for 2 minutes. And if there's anyone joining us on Facebook, you are also able to join in on the Menti. So we just want to understand what your expectations are from this dialogue. We've heard a few speakers make their interventions, and there's been a lot that we've learned so far. But for those who are joining us, what do you hope to take away from this dialogue? So you could type in more than one. So once again, you could log on to www.menti.com and use the code 732822657. And don't worry, you could type in as many as you want, and we will not see who has submitted their responses. Learn more about how we could build resilient food systems. Okay. Lessons learned. So I guess this will be lessons learned from what the speakers have said, and also what we will be bringing out later on in the group work. All right. To understand how we as individuals could contribute to building food systems resilience, get different perspectives, how we join solutions, figure out what has worked and what hasn't worked. Maybe just about 2 or 3 more. Just so this would also help us better understand what the expectations are, and during our next independent dialogue, we'll be able to see how we could put them into practice as well. Does anyone else have any expectations? Come up with joint dialogues. Okay. Right. To understand global best practices. Right. We also, I think with what Mr. Leslie said earlier, that was quite insightful. Contribute to solutions, country experiences. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. You could keep typing in if you would want to. But we have a 3-question quiz with no prize at the end. So I hope you're all ready for this. I'm just going to go on to the next slide. You should see your slide change on your Menti, ideally. Okay, so you could type in your name to join in on this quiz. You could use your given name, or you could use any other name. No one would ever know. So we're just going to keep it on for about 10 seconds more, so we have more people joining us on the quiz. Again, you could log on to menti.com and use the code 732822657. Right. Okay, I think we have quite a few people playing with us. So, and right. So our first question is, the Food System Summit is organized around a number of action tracks and cross-cutting levels of change. How many are there? So there are 4 options that you could select from. I believe Professor Huck also spoke of this during his keynote address, if you're paying attention. Let's see how many of you got the answer right. 5 action tracks and 3 levels of schedule. Oh, okay. All right. All of this information is available on the UN Food Summit website, just in case you wanted to know we got information from. Well, so let's see how we are going. Okay. Looks like Vicky, Sama, and Raita is leading. Okay. So we have 2 more questions. So these results could change. Right. Moving on to question 2. What is not one of the 7 principles of engagement guiding the food summit? So we have 4 options here: act with urgency, ensure equality for all, equity for all, recognize complexity, embrace multi-stakeholder inclusivity. So this is particularly with regard to the food system summit. So let's see what says. Oh, oops, no one has gotten the answer right. Alrighty, so we have 1 more question. Let's see how so this pans out. And thank you very much to everyone taking part in this quiz. Really appreciate it. How many of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are sustainable food systems linked to? So we have 4 options: 10, 1, 2, or 17. This is the final question in our quiz. Let's see how everyone did. Oh, okay. We have 1 person who got the answer correct. I believe Professor Huck also mentioned this in his speech. So, okay. Let's see who our winner is, if this changes anytime soon. Right. Okay, and let's see what the overall score is. So we have Ricky who won. All right. Congratulations, Ricky. And yeah, we will go back to our scheduled program. Wasita?
Yes, thank you very much, Sanashia. Now, if we may have the screen on the screen, the facilitators, because we're moving to the next part of our discussion or the dialogue, where we have 2 sessions, 2 group work, and we have facilitators with us who are on the screen. We have Sanashia, who will be leading 1, and then we have Denise Mombao from Psych and Trust, and Duncan Williamson from Nourish Food Systems, and Daniel, sorry, Daniel, who spoke with you earlier, who's also going to contribute in facilitating these discussions, the breakout groups. Can Dennis please explain how we'll be doing this? Because we'll have 2 sessions, we'll have report back, and then the rest is up to you to explain, Dennis.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm also apologizing for background noises. There's a storm going on. Yeah, so we're going to go into 2 sessions. For the first session, we split into 3 groups, and each group has a Mentimeter set up. I will quickly show how it looks. And there are 4 questions on the Mentimeter. And for the first phase of group work, we're going to answer question 1 and question 2. What are solutions and challenges in addressing climate and disaster risks along the agricultural supply and value chain to build resilient food systems? Question 1. And question 2, what are solutions and challenges in addressing climate and disaster risks to ensure universal food access? Please provide already existing examples. And in the space below, we have a field for solutions and 1 for challenges, since those can directly feed into the I apologize for the thunderstorm, directly feed into the food system summit. And we come back to the main session and report back. And after that, we are going to break a second time into group work and try to answer the third and fourth question. And for those of you who haven't used Miro before, basically you can go to the left side once you click the link, and you can create a sticky note with your input. You select a color, put it somewhere, and then you can type in it and place it there. And that way we can capture all your input. If you're not comfortable with it, you can also put your input in the chat, and someone from our team will make a sticky note out of it. All right. Thank you very much. And I think now we can break into the groups. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. So before you go into breakout groups, I would request everyone to please fill the forms, because we need this when we're submitting the synthesis of this discussion. So Ronnie has put in the chat box the link to the form that you need to fill. Please, if you haven't done this yet, please do that. And Sanasha, I think you've already put people into groups. Maybe we can all wait for you to send the link and we'll join. And we have 20 minutes for each session. Thank you.
It was a really good, varied discussion. So under the first area, and please, the group, correct me if I'm wrong or what I've forgotten, a couple of things came up for the first question that I thought were really interesting. One is looking at the whole digital and technology space and the need to get greater access to digital technology to people, particularly to enable farmers to sell their crop at a time where they can gain higher incomes for it, which will secure their long-term security and viability, instead of just selling their crops when the price is at its lowest. And this is, I think that's a really interesting way of helping people survive long term. We also talked about the role of agroforestry and ecosystem restoration, including restoring things like mangroves. And then in the second subject, two particular areas came up when we were looking at the food access. One was relocalizing the food supply chain, shortening the food supply chain to make sure the local communities are more connected to the local suppliers, which should hopefully increase access. And the other, we talked about agricultural diversity, particularly enhancing crop diversity, so you have more resilient foods coming to market as well, so you're not reliant on just one or two crops which can be affected by a particularly bad harvest or extreme weather events. I think those are the main bits from me. Did I miss anything?
If anyone else would like to quickly add in 30 seconds, if anything is missed, please take the floor. Yeah, I think, Duncan, you've done a great job in summarizing everything. Let's move to Danielle. Anyone else who would like to add anything else, please type into the chat box. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you, Rosita. And yes, interesting to see the results or the different results coming out of the group of the different groups and how complementary they are. So great, really great to see that. Our focus was, first of all, for the first question, on increasing the awareness of climate and disaster risk in food systems, especially capacity building of vulnerable communities, increasing financial literacy of farmers and agricultural communities, and then moving into, or which would then enable financial resilience mechanisms such as microinsurance, such as crop insurance, but also for those that have no means to afford insurance, adaptive social safety nets. We also spoke about resilient crops and adaptive farming practices. So drought-resistant seeds, for example, noting that, of course, there is the challenge that not for all crops and not for all regions, there is at this point in time resilient seeds that can endure heavy droughts. So we need a system of different resilience measures in place, both elements that reduce risk, such as adaptive farming practices, then elements that support preparedness and anticipation. So we spoke about early warning systems here bearing in mind that the predictability of certain climate events and of certain shocks to food systems is still a major challenge for these early warning systems to really trigger effective anticipatory action. And then ultimately we spoke about response and coping with disasters once they occur, and this is where financial mechanisms such as insurance can play a role. On the universal level, I think we spoke. We also realized a lot of what works on the ground and to build resilient food systems in countries will also promote universal food access and security. But we then expanded the discussion towards fair trade certifications, for example, the question around what is the proper price, how do farming practices, subsidies in the global north affect countries in the global south. So we need a lot of international coordination and dialogue on this, international frameworks. And then moving on to the community level, also promoting, let's say, a certain independence of communities on the global food system to avoid sort of, or to strengthen their ability to deal with shocks on a global level, and having sort of food at hand on community levels as well, such as through food reserves. Yeah, so I think I'll stop here, and if there's anything I missed, I encourage my group to come in and add.
Thank you, Daniel. So anyone who would like to add, please type in the chat box, because I think we are running out of time today. So we have another round of breakout groups for 15 minutes with 2 other questions in the same way. So Senasha will help you to get back into your breakout group, and we'll have a similar report back 2 to 3 minutes from the facilitators. Senasha, would you want to add any information on this?
No, just that our group has to present.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I'm really sorry. Yes, Senasha, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, so I will give a very short recap in interest of time. And I think actually most of the things we discussed have already been captured by the other 2 groups as well. I think one thing that came up a lot in our discussion was the food system, let's say, efficiency. So there's a lack of investment in infrastructure. That means like transport, storage facilities, communications, and digital infrastructure. There's a high amount of food waste, of post-harvest losses, and not a lot of value addition to products. So a lot of the solutions we talked about focused on addressing these, for example, by using alternative methods such as micro-irrigation or hydroponics, to use green water for agriculture instead of blue water, to have methods to reduce, like to sell food that is close to expiry, to sell excess food at lower price, to have an algorithm that identifies food like that and helps to get it to those that are in need of food. To invest more in the infrastructure and enabling environments, to build capacities, to have both technical knowledge and combine it with conventional agricultural practices and indigenous seed varieties that are already there and adjusted to weather conditions. And then to talk about things that are not directly food production, but distribution, such as school feeding programs, food banks, and make food available to those that need it to ensure universal food access. And I think some of the other challenges identified were high food miles, long supply chains and value chains, lack of awareness of how these things interconnect, and also lack of data, for example, market information. Sometimes there are price monopolies in the market, and sometimes there are unsustainable agricultural practices that are continued due to a lack of knowledge or lack of coordination between different stakeholders, or just because it's like for different reasons. So I think food system efficiency is one of the big points we talked about, and reducing waste, reducing losses, and making more of what is there, instead of trying to use more land or expand cultivation. Okay, I think the rest, many other things already were discussed in the other two groups.
Thank you very much, and sorry
and if anyone has something to add, yeah, please. No worries.
Thank you. And if anyone has comments, any additional points on what presenters just made, please add to the chat box. We can collect it to synthesize as part of this discussion. So shall we move to the next session? And we'll keep it to 15 minutes so we could have time to have report back as well. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We have 4 minutes, so we'll quickly go into reporting. I see Dennis's face on the screen, so maybe you could start with the report back before I forget again that there are 3 groups.
Yes, sure, of course. So this time it's a bit hard to summarize because we talked a lot about a lot of different things. So we have as challenges a lot of again, lack of data was identified, lack of access to digitalized data, then lack of gender disaggregated data, lack of data, like detailed data on the household level, and then on the side of the beneficiaries, lack of knowledge about financial mechanisms, opportunities, lack of repayment capacity. Then there can be things like disputes over land and unclear or contested land ownership, informal, unregistered food producers that are not part of formal systems, lack of financial literacy, conflict impacts, for example, on pastoralists and migrants, lack of trusts among agricultural communities on insurance products, lack of trust in new or novel financial models, often also as a result of existing mechanism pilot schemes that have failed or have not been continued. And then we identified all the number of solutions or possible solutions for these. For the third question, what are solutions to harness existing innovative finance mechanisms? We have things like collecting the existing data that is there from different sources and institutions and try to triangulate and meta-analyze this data to get more out of the data that is there, maybe even through machine learning or AI or other technological approaches, to connect the existing data points that we have and fill the gaps based on patterns that are there. And to get the data from all the sources that are there, not just from, for example, the meteorological department, but also from like the agricultural department, from communities themselves, from private actors along the supply chain, and from all the institutions that collect some kind of data on weather, on market information, on capacities, on household assets, and things like that. And then also maybe offering bundled solutions that combine financial services or insurance with other benefits, for example, capacity building or knowledge transfer or technology, or even development interventions. And then, yeah, capacity building, community engagement, and yeah, that's all. And for the fourth question about vulnerable communities, so some of the solutions we talked about were to have localized products that are very context specific, to strengthen the links between the supply and value chain actors and also this flow of information along that, to build additional trust and awareness, to that enhance the trust of farmers in insurance products, maybe even through informal education channels, to provide financial services for an affordable price, probably then in many cases subsidized, to address community issues and find a way that allows finance access to be part of this addressing community issues. And then maybe also things like innovative payment mechanisms, where the premium is paid not necessarily in money, but for example, as the contribution of labor or other services that are rendered. So communities that do not have a lot of like formal financial assets can still pay premiums through other mechanisms. Yeah, so these are some of the highlights from our group. If I missed anything, please add. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Can I have maybe Duncan next, if you could present the findings or the key points of discussion?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, covered lots of similar issues. The only thing to sort of add is we sort of spoke a bit about the lack of financial literacy amongst farmers and how the current loan system is based on collateral. So some of the easy ways of dealing with that are either look at new ways of providing loans and then try to bridge the gap between the knowledge of financial institutions and farmers, so they start to speak the same language, and potentially use train the next generation, the young people, and also women to help support. So there's a greater mutual understanding of this, which will also help going on into the next generation. So those are the sort of additional challenges and solutions we saw for the first part. For the other question, we talked about some of the solutions we talked about were how government could support and facilitate innovative partnerships. Companies could use their resources to support farmers better. They could actually get involved with this to help the access to finance or to help add the collateral. And then farmers need to be part of the design process for developing financial arrangements. So it's very much about people working a lot better together, and a lot more collaboration and partnership building at the start of the process, not having top-down mechanisms thrust on to a community who don't really have all the available knowledge at their fingertips to deal with it properly, with greater oversight from the government and greater support from the government to take some of the pressure off the financial institutions and farmers. So so government is almost a guarantor for this. So that'll do. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. It's very interesting how there are common things that have been discussed across different groups in solutions. Yes, so Daniel, over to you now.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, a lot of it has already been mentioned by the other facilitators. I think in terms of accessing finance, we also acknowledge that capacity building and strengthening financial literacy can play a major contribution, but also really connecting funding to vulnerable communities and sort of avoiding or trying to eliminate as much as possible an excessive intermediary or an excessive level or sort of chain of intermediaries. So more direct access to finance, more efficient and less bureaucratic access to financing. We also spoke about promoting sort of integrated approaches, so those that connect, let's say, risk reduction, risk information and analytics to access to insurance or insurance products and financial products like microcredit, for example, or then on a macro level, integrated packages of resilience, and also in terms of on a sovereign and government level, connecting to frameworks, NDCs, for example, national adaptation plans can help to unlock finances or financing from the GEF, the Green Climate Fund, multilateral development banks, etc. We also spoke about the private sector and the role that the private sector can play, also looking at new, let's say, sustainable investors coming in and making sort of creating a connection and creating markets between sustainable finance, philanthropical finance, hedge funds that are now targeted towards impact investments, and a connection between those and the communities that are vulnerable to climate change and that are in need of enhanced food system resilience. So I think I'll stop here, and if there's anything I missed, then please, I encourage the group to come in and complement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for summarizing that very vibrant discussion in our group. So we are running like 5 minutes more than what we planned for, but I think it was a great discussion and we had a lot of information coming in. I want to thank everyone who took part today, the speakers, facilitators, and also to just highlight going forward, how this would feed into the system of what happens with the Food Systems Summit, as well as knowledge products. So one, as part of the Food Systems Summit, we will have this input provided based on the discussions that we had. One, and then also build on the inputs that you provided to develop a knowledge product / information note, listing out all the solutions, the challenges listed, and also having clusters where we would approach more people to provide input based on what we have received, whether they would add to this. And also identifying a prioritization method if some people feel this is more important than the others, to see whether we could have a solution list that we can prioritize and see who would work on these things and have examples added as well. So this would happen in the next 6 weeks or so, but we will definitely share the summary with you for more input. If we missed anything, you can add to it as well. And there's an upcoming second food system discussion, independent dialogue on the 17th. So if you're interested, that would be on action track 4 on livelihoods, and that will focus on just transition. Some of you would be already part of this as partners. So thank you, everyone. If anyone has any further input, I'll give 30 seconds to add. Raise your hand and quickly add. If not, we can close it for the day.
Sorry, it's just not input, but maybe just a quick reminder to, if you all haven't filled out the registration form, please do so. If you have trouble filling it out, maybe just leave your email address. We could follow up with you on this, so that we could also invite you all for the next independent dialogue that we hope to have. But yeah, thank you.
So thank you, Sanasha, and thank you, everyone, and hope you have a nice day, evening, wherever you are. Thank you, and bye.